All right, for those that are attendees, there's only a few of you. We have 5 folks. And so we're going to give this a few more minutes if we have to do for a formal presentation. Otherwise, we'll just do question and answer. And so, Chris, I saw that you just hopped on. Amber, I see you as well. So feel free if anyone has a question. Nancy, hopefully you got a good bike ride in today. All right, good. Terry, you'll spare me for being the only one talking. So see your
So
hands.
my question is, if measure F passes and measure G passes, but H fails, would you be able to bring back measure H in a different form, either with lower percentages or to make it commercial directed, or just a different proposition if G passes to move us towards a charter city?
Yeah, great question. So for the benefit of the audience, I'm just going to highlight what each of those measures are, just so we're all familiar with the starting point. So measure F is the citizen initiative sales tax specific for our roads. And it's a half-cent sales tax, and it's projected to generate approximately $4 million each year. If that passes, that money starts, that tax goes into effect April 1st of 2025. So it's important to know that we don't get that immediately, but that would be $4 million. Measure G is the city charter for Benicia's future. And that, if passed, enables the voters to then implement a real property transfer tax, which is Measure H. And so to your question, if F passes and G passes and H doesn't, what can we do in the future? Well, what that means is, and your question was right, in 26 or 28, now it has to be at a council election, so we can't do it during the primary, but we could return to the voters with just a single question because we're already have that charter city capability to implement a real property transfer tax if the voters allow it. Then we would only have one initiative in a future election, and it could be any formula related to real property transfer tax. So it could be the same that we're discussing and considering this November. It could be something that looks totally different. The key is it has to be a real property transfer tax. Okay. All right. And so a few other folks have popped in, and this is a small group. So unless it gets much larger, I'm not going to go into a formal presentation. I would rather use this time and give you all an opportunity to offer some thoughts, comments, and questions, and then we can kind of proceed there. And if necessary, we can pull up the presentation if I need that for a visual aid. But this really is just an opportunity to engage and have that conversation. So the floor is open. Just put your hand up, and then Jeremy will unmute you. Nancy.
Okay. What I've run into talking to people, Mario, is they don't understand that putting this measure on the ballot requires a designation as charter city, right? And for the actual transfer tax to occur. But what they don't understand is it's only for the transfer tax that we're putting in this charter city. Is that correct?
Correct, and great question. And this is one of those things that's very difficult. It's most folks, if I were to pull 10 people down First Street and ask, hey, do you know what a general law city is? My guess is few of them would know. Most cities in California are a general law city. There are 124 charter cities in California, so almost 25%, about 25%. And charter cities allow you to do a variety of things. Vallejo is a charter city, and they have a variety of different powers that come with that. What Benicia is doing and considering for November is to have a single power of a charter city, and that is the implementation of a real property transfer tax. So Measure G is only for the ability for the voters to implement a real property transfer tax. It is meaningless in all other regards. It doesn't change anything related to the city's operation. It doesn't allow the city to implement any other tax or fee. We already have all those powers as a general law city. So it only gives us the ability to ask voters to implement a real property transfer tax. The city council can't amend it. They can't change the rate. Only the voters can do that. And then Jeremy, I'll just let you facilitate. When you see a hand raised, you can just go ahead and unmute them and let them speak.
Go ahead, Terry, you're next.
Hi, I'm just curious, if Measure F passes, when would that half sales tax kick in? I know that there was a delay or some sort of delay between Measure B passing and then the actual collection and then the receipt. So that took, 9 months, maybe, almost a year by the time the city will see the funding. Is that the same criteria, about a year, rough and tough, that we would be seeing funding to start fixing the roads?
Yeah, good question. So you mentioned a couple of letters out there, so I want to give the benefit for the audience just to kind of recall what those are. So Measure B was our general sales tax that the voters considered in March of this year. And so they passed that in March 5th of 2024. Yet it wasn't until October 1st, this month, that tax rate went into effect. And there's a lag time on when we even start receiving those dollars. So it won't be until probably February that we will get our first receipts from Measure B. So something that was passed in March goes into effect in October. We don't even really start receiving those dollars until about February. And then, of course, it's going to take a full year from October 1, 2024 for us to get that full benefit of about that $6 million to support our operations. So too with Measure F. Measure F is that specific purpose tax for roads, half cent, projected to generate $4 million. If the voters pass that this November, that goes into effect April 1st of 2025. So again, we're not going to start even seeing any receipts from that until late summer of 2025. And we don't have our full $4 million until April of 2026. And so it's important, I think, to put that in perspective on how we go about scheduling out our road work, and that it's not something that on November 6th, we are immediately going to get $4 million and we can start doing road work. So important to put that in perspective as we plan out how we spend in our operations, as well as prepping for road work.
Go ahead, Terry, with your next question.
This question always may come out of left field, so I apologize if it's kind of weird, but the city collects $800,000 from the gas tax for roads. How much gasoline does the city purchase a year? And how much are we paying in sales tax? Is the city paying in tax on the gas that we're actually going to get back?
Well, I can answer part of that question, and that is a new one. No one has ever asked. I know we have staff from Public Works. I don't know if they have that information readily available. If they do, they can pop it to me. At least how much gas we purchase as a city. I don't know that offhand, but we can certainly find that out and get that information back to you. As to your first question, we put out a lot of information highlighting the monies that we receive to invest in our roads. And you referenced $800,000, and we do receive $800,000 for gas tax that goes to kind of our road construction. So those are the funds that we're going to use when we go out to bid and we do major road work. Those are the funds that we're using to support that work. In addition to the $200,000 that is in our franchise agreement with Republic Services, our garbage hauler, there's a specific clause in there that there's $200,000 is specifically earmarked for road maintenance to abate the kind of wear and tear that the garbage trucks do to our roads. Now, there's a couple of other pieces of that information. We get more than $200,000 from Republic Services. In fact, it's about $1 million total that we receive from Republic Services. But that other $800,000 supports our general operations. It's going to support our police and fire, library services, what have you. It goes in there for general operations. Additionally, we receive another, $700,000 from gas tax to support other things related to our road infrastructure. So that supports all of our maintenance of our traffic lights. It also supports the electricity for all of our lampposts, primarily in the downtown area. So yes, we receive more than $800,000 in state gas tax, but it does other things related to our road network. And so if we were to not spend those dollars in that area, we would have to backfill it. Certainly, we couldn't turn off all of our traffic lights and turn off all of our lampposts at night. So that's not something that we can, take those dollars and move those over to investing in the road construction. But we'll get back to you with regard to how much money the city spends buying fuel and what our tax liability is on that. Okay, all right, Terry, you got another one? Nope. I guess you do.
Thank you. It's very rare that I get to answer these kinds of questions, or ask these kinds of questions. In the 15-year period that we're talking about here, to get the pavement index from 50 something or other, low 50s, up to a fairly passable of 70, what would happen if a future city council is petitioned by the community to sunset Measure F? So Measure F can only be sunsetted by the voters, right?
Correct. And again, for the benefit of the audience, just for the term of sunset, typically what that means, and I'm going to go back to Measure B. Measure B, as part of the provision of that ballot initiative, has a sunset of 12 years, meaning that it goes away unless we return it to the ballot and the voters renew it. Measure F has no sunset, so it will go on indefinitely to support road maintenance. Now, that makes sense because we will always have road maintenance to maintain up until the time we have flying cars. And then we might want to revisit not having this measure to invest in our roads. So to your point, only the voters could submit a petition to take it off the vote, the tax rolls. And so you would have another election where the voters would remove that. And that's the process by which you would remove Measure F as a half-cent sales tax. And for the benefit of those folks that have popped in for the last few minutes, there's only 9 attendees. And in light of that, instead of going over a presentation, which I'm happy to do, if there's anyone that wants to see the formal presentation, and I'll ask if anyone would like to see that, pop your hand up and let me know. Otherwise, this is really just going to be an opportunity to ask questions. And if I need a visual aid, happy to show that. And anyone that popped in late, no, this is not normally my attire. I was coaching baseball a few minutes ago, so I hopped in from the field. Bill, great. Have a question from you.
Go ahead, Bill.
Actually, I would like to see the presentation.
Okay. All right. Well, then we can go ahead and roll that. I appreciate it. We spent a lot of time working on the presentation, so happy to do that. I'm going to do my best to be rather kind of brief in going through this. I gave this presentation about a month ago to the city council, and it took a little while, but I'm going to go at hopefully a good pace, so then we can get to a point where we can have some additional questions. So if you have questions during the presentation, just hold your thought. I'm going to get through this, and then we can return and go through the presentation. And so I want to acknowledge Jeremy, who is our IT in the sky that will be running this presentation for us, and appreciate that. So this really is an update on our resiliency plan. And this is something that we have been working on as a city for about 18 months. And we will be sharing this presentation again at our community center next Monday at our Wickedly Informed event. It's a family-friendly event. We have Halloween activities for kids. We'll have a food truck out there. It's really designed to invite the community to come in and get an update on what's happening in your city. We rang the alarm bells 18 months ago. Where are we? So this is a little bit of that update. So go ahead, Jeremy, if you want to advance the slide. I think it's really important when we talk about our fiscal challenges and our structural deficit, for me, when sharing this information with the public, it's so important to explain the why. How is it that the most affluent community in Solano County, anchored by a refinery, does not have enough resources to sustain the services that we all enjoy? It's a very important question, and it's something that I think leads to this kind of the first part of this presentation. So when you go to the next slide, we're just really going to highlight kind of the reality that is Benicia's economy. And the vast majority of our sales tax is generated from the industrial park. Yet the industrial park, for the most part, is made up of warehouses, and they don't produce a lot of sales tax. They don't have a lot of jobs. There's not a lot of secondary or tertiary economic benefit. So of that 63% of all the sales tax that's generated in the city, we're talking about probably 20 businesses. Now, contrast that by the economic activity that's happening on First Street. So 7% of all of our sales tax is generated on First Street. And in fact, First Street over the last 10 years has been the most successful commercial sector in Benicia. It is generating over $400,000 a year in sales tax. And the vast majority of those tax proceeds are coming from our eateries. So you're having from our bars and restaurants is generating the vast majority of sales tax. The retail, while an important component to the kind of shopping experience on First Street, is rather small in the sales taxes produced. So we go to the next slide. The other factor that we have to realize about Benicia is our kind of home market. The vast majority of revenue that any city in California receives is from property tax. Yet in Benicia's case, we have over 2,000 acres that are open space where houses cannot be built. Speaking of building houses, we've only had 126 new units in the last 14 years now. Slide's a little bit dated. And of that, most of those are accessory dwelling units, ADUs. Worse still, only 4 commercial buildings have been built. Well, why is that? Benicia's on an island. We're built out community. Our industrial park is built out. There are very few vacant parcels to build new manufacturing or commercial facilities. And so what that has done is it has kind of frozen in time our ability to kind of grow our economy. We are what we are, and you're only going to slowly, incrementally grow with some changes in businesses that happen to go down on First Street or the industrial park. So nothing that's going to majorly move the needle. So as we go to the next slide, highlighting this thought on property tax, and you may have heard this before, 41% of all of the homes in Benicia have not been transferred in more than 35 years. Now, why is that a big deal for the city? Because as I said earlier, the primary source of revenue for a city is property tax. And because of Prop 13, when those homes were purchased in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the basis for those homes was the setup for the property tax. And so we are receiving today, for the cost of operating in 2024, revenue from the 1990s or 1980s. And that becomes a problem. Now, yes, property tax in each of those homes has gone up 2% a year, but it hasn't kept up with inflation. And so when that much of your property is held in 10, 20, 30 years ago, it really limits the city's ability to keep up with the costs. And that is a primary concern. Additionally, our population is declining. And you can go to any room or any activity in Benicia and you will see folks that have been here for a very long time. And they have continued to live here. They have raised their families here, and the kids have gone off and left Benicia, and the parents remain. Well, why have they remained? Because Benicia is an amazing place. And the other thing that shouldn't be lost in this presentation is somehow that, you know, Benicia did something wrong. Well, the fact that 41% of all of our homes haven't transferred in 35 years means that we've done something right, because people like to live here. But it's a consequence of providing amazing services and having that kind of slow growth that has given this Benicia that we all love. There's a trade-off for that. And the trade-off is we've kind of run out of revenue in order to support those services. So we go to the next slide, we'll see that, well, what is the problem? And our problem is that our expenditures are outpacing revenue. So I want to go to the next slide, and this really highlights, well, what are we spending our money on? And I know that much of the talk, especially when we're considering additional tax revenue, is, well, that goes to the general fund, so it's a black hole. Ladies and gentlemen, here's your black hole. Nearly half of the revenue for our general fund goes to support our public safety. You'll notice that the Public Works Water Enterprise, that is the water enterprise, it's not our general fund. As residents of Benicia, we all pay our water bill. We have water and wastewater. That's the dollars that are used to support those operations, is that 21 million. So when you back that out, the rest is what we're spending to operate the city. And so when you see $11 million in public works, that's for the wastewater. And then next to that, you have the non-enterprise. So to maintain all of our roads and all the employees that support that network, all of the engineering, $3.8 million. Parks and recreation, to manage all of our 28 parks, our community center, our pool, all of our facilities, the clock tower, right? That's $7.5 million. Police, 14 million, fire, 11. Community development, having to do much of the things that are mandated by the state of California, 2.8. City manager's office includes IT and human resources and economic development. Also includes the city clerk and city council, which is really actually very limited costs. And our library is at 2.4. There's where your dollars go. And the vast majority of these dollars are spent on people, for which we have 222. We have reduced in a year's time 10 full-time positions. So now you go to the next slide, and now you look at revenue. And the piece here that I really want to draw attention to is the property tax. We talked about that just a moment ago, $21 million. Now, for anyone that was paying attention for the slide ago, why don't we go back, Jeremy? And I want everyone just to do quick math. I want you to tally up the nearly $12 million we spend in fire and the $14 million that we spend in police. That's $26 million. Now we go to the next slide and we look at our revenue. All of the property tax in Benicia, including the money we receive from Valero Refinery, doesn't even pay for public safety. Now I'll pause and let that sink in. That is our reality. So this isn't a sense of mismanaging things. It is a reality that we have very good service that we provide in this community, and there's a cost to that. And the sources of revenue are not keeping pace with those expenses. And so if we go to the next slide, what you will see is a slide that was very familiar to what we talked about in the spring or in the winter leading up to the March initiatives. This is our 5-year forecast. Now, what this includes is the revenue that we will receive when Measure B and Measures A go online, right, which started to on October 1st for Measure B. It also reflects the labor agreements that we have with all of our employees, and we have an additional 2 years with every single employee group in Benicia, so that is factored in. And what do you notice? Once again, our expenditures are outpacing revenue. When I was talking to folks in winter and the spring of this year, talking about why we have Measures A and Measure B on the ballot, the number one comment, the number one complaint was, why is it that the city saw this coming years ago and didn't do anything about it? And my answer then, as it is today, is doing something about it is difficult. Doing something about it means reducing people and thereby reducing services. Doing something about it means going to your community and asking for additional investment, which means taxes, which not a lot of people are happy about. But what are we doing now differently than what we did before? We are showing the same graph, the graph of expenditures outpacing revenues. But unlike before, we are continuing to reduce costs by reducing staff every single year over the next 5 years. Even though we just went to our voters 6 months ago in March and asked for additional taxes and local investment, we are at it again in November because we can see the horizon and that we know that if we want to maintain the level of service that this community enjoys, we have to do things differently and expand our revenue base. Because not only do we have the responsibility of operations, when you go to the next slide, we have the responsibility of finally taking care of the more than $225 million in infrastructure needs. Now, when we as a public see this chart as residents, it almost looks so overwhelming. It's as though we just shrug our shoulders and go, it's too big. How do we fix it? What does this even mean? What does this look like? And when you go to the next slide, this is what it looks like. Too many roads in Benicia are in this condition. And it's in this condition because for nearly 25 years, we have not added to the money we receive from the state of California to invest in our roads. Why? Because we have continued to prop up the services that we provide in library services and recreation and park services and having police and fire. And in order to continue to keep that level of service that we all enjoy, we didn't make investments into our roads. And we go to the next slide, into our facilities. If anyone has been to Benicia Community Park, there are times you have been and seen a swamp and other times the Sahara Desert, because we have had in just the first 10 months, 10 irrigation line breaks in just fields 5 and 6 alone. Why is that? Well, this park was built in the 1990s. In the 1990s, as we get into the new century, the park is beautiful. And so at the time, we're like, well, you know what? We want to continue to support programs. We want to keep fees down. We want to continue to support our police and fire and other things. So we're not going to put any money away to take care of the irrigation. That's going to be a problem into the future. That future is here. And throughout the summer, you couldn't drive around Benicia without looking at a park and seeing fields going brown. That wasn't because we weren't watering them. It wasn't because we didn't want to take care of them. It was because we had irrigation line after irrigation line after irrigation line break. And we had fewer and fewer people to maintain those. If we go to the next slide, it's just another example of these irrigation lines that are broken, and we don't have the resources to go in there and do that major renovation to fix this asset. And when you go to the next slide, you'll just see an example of our deteriorating buildings. This is 2 pictures of our police department. Again, much like we are as homeowners, if we are kind of pushing the envelope in paying for expenses, we push out, well, we're not going to put money away for that new roof, or we're not going to put money away to paint this year, or we're not going to put money away to do carpet. We're going to push it for another year and another year and another year. And that's what we are as a city. And as somebody with the mindset that I care more about what's going to happen beyond 2 years, we're putting forward a plan to try to address that. And so as you go to the next slide, this is how we're going to do it. How do we address an economy that is not keeping pace, a community that is desirous of all of these great services that make Benicia so special, and addressing $225 million in infrastructure? And so when you go to the next slide, we have seen this image, this plan of our resiliency. We've talked about it now for over a year. And as I've shared multiple times in presentations and talking with council, this is not rocket science at all. Any organization, when stressed with a structural deficit, whether it's government, whether it's our home, whether it's a corporation, would do the things that we are proposing here. You cut your cost, you look to grow your revenue, and you find ways to expand your base. In this case, as a city, saying yes to smart growth. Not rocket science. It's very simple, but it's hard. Because when we talk about cutting costs, we're talking about eliminating people. And it's people that deliver the services. In the 1990s, we had 17 full-time employees managing our 28 parks in Benicia. Today, we're down to 9 and a working supervisor. We have fewer people within the confines of City Hall to provide services to our citizens. And we need to continue to reduce that headcount so that we can continue to provide the most essential services to our community. It means going to our community and saying, we need to ask to broaden our tax base to continue to support things into the future. And this is why we have measures on this November ballot. The citizens of Benicia has said, we are tired of waiting to fix our roads. We want a dedicated funding source for our roads, and that is Measure F. And then we'll talk in a moment about Measures G and Measure H and the importance of those measures and why they're named what they're named. Measure G is the City Charter for Benicia's Future, Part 1, and Measure H is the Real Property Transfer Tax for Benicia's Future, Part 2, because we see on the horizon expenses outpacing revenue. We're living in a moment when we have $225 million and we're finally doing something about it. And then there is that smart growth. For the council in 2022 and 2023 and 2024 have done what we can do as a city in rezoning certain areas, increasing the height for First Street to facilitate a hotel development, looking at reducing the need to get use permits out in the industrial park to make things easier for our businesses. Yet that work that has been done from the city standpoint will not bear fruit for probably 10 years in the 2030s. And so we are setting ourselves up for success 10 years from now, but it will be a while before we see an economic benefit from that. And as you go to the next slide, you're going to talk again in each segment of what we've done. And I know we're in the middle of election season. We are 2 weeks away where we have 3 basically tax initiatives on the ballot, and that's what all our public wants to talk about. But I want to talk for just a moment about the work that the city of Benicia has done prior to asking voters for additional money. We have had the largest staff decrease in more than 20 years, reducing our full-time employee count by 10 to 222. And as I've highlighted multiple times in correspondence to our community and to the council, we need to continue to reduce headcount by probably 4 to 5 employees for every year for the next few years. That's not going to be easy because that means that service is going to be different or retired altogether. A year ago, we had a library department. A year ago, we had a Parks and Community Services department. We don't have that today. And that's not because as city manager, I believe not having that is the best way to do service. It's born out of necessity. It's born out of having to leverage the resources we do have to collapse those departments into a new community services department to facilitate library, family resources, and recreation services. Building maintenance and parks have been moved over to the Public Works Department. Having grown up in the Parks and Community Services Department, I can tell you that is not my professional recommendation on delivering best service. But when I look at our budget and I look at the horizon on the cost ahead of us, we have to do things differently if we are going to survive as a city. So these are the things that we have already done and the things that we will continue to do to cut costs regardless of the outcome this November. As we go to the next slide, we'll talk about the other things from a policy standpoint that we're putting into place. So in 2022, the city council adopted a new reserve policy, meaning that when we close out our budget year, if there's ever a surplus, meaning that we receive more money in property tax or receive more money in sales tax, and that happens on occasion, that it doesn't go into this black hole. It immediately goes into a reserve policy that you see before you. The vast majority of it would go into our capital maintenance project. So if we had $1 million that we ended the year and we had $1 million left, it would $750,000 would be deposited into that capital maintenance reserve, and it would require 4/5 of the city council to take that money out of that reserve to spend it somewhere else. So we are putting policy into place, and then taking action to address a problem that has been neglected for far too long. As we go to the next slide, we will see that as we look ahead to what we're going to do in 25 and 27, and what you're seeing here are slides from our public outreach effort for priority-based budgeting that was done in 2016 through 2018. And that is something that I have foreshadowed to staff and foreshadowed to the city council that I want to bring back for the 2027 budget. This is a major undertaking for the community. And what this means is that as city staff, we enumerate all the programs that we offer in the city of Benicia. And that's a task in itself, because oftentimes we don't think about everything we do in a programmatic stance or fashion. And so we identified in this process about 220 programs. And then we evaluate those programs on a matrix on, how many people does it serve? Is it mandated by the state? So there's a criteria at which we judge those programs. Then we take that and engage our community and have them do that same exercise. That takes time. When we go into our 25 budget and the city adopts a budget every 2 years, we will kind of operate and try to continue doing what we're doing now with some reduction in staff. And the moment that budget is adopted in June of 2025, we're going to take our break, celebrate the 4th of July, and then come back at the end of July and August and begin this process. And it will probably be about 18 months. Because the major change we're going to see in Benicia is going to be in the 2027-29 budget. Because then we really have to figure out how to do things differently with fewer people. And the only way that's going to be successful in a community is to have public engagement, to have buy-in. Because I guarantee you, if I or the city council or my department heads came up with a plan and saying, we're going to reduce this many employees and eliminate all these services, our city council chambers would be packed. And as residents, you would go up to the podium and you would say, please do not cut this program. A parade of terribles will happen if you eliminate this program. And most importantly, you will tell your city council members, you don't have to make this cut right now. We have time. We can wait. And sure enough, you would be right. The city council wouldn't have to take action immediately. And they would rationalize and say, well, we need more time. And this happens every single budget cycle, anytime you have to make difficult decisions. So one of the reasons why I feel that I was appointed city manager is to apply the experience that I've had, not only in Benicia, but in other communities, on how we develop a comprehensive, cohesive budgeting plan that can be understood and appreciated by the community. I'm talking today in 2024 about something that we're going to do in 2027. That's how far out we're planning. So as you go to the next slide, now we reach that second pillar of our bridge to prosperity, and that's local investment. I know that nobody wants to pay more in taxes, but when I talk to people at my coffees, talk to people at the baseball field and the supermarket, while they don't want to pay more taxes, the number one comment is, can you just fix it? Can you fix the irrigation line so our kids can play soccer and baseball? Can you fix this pothole? My road is going to gravel, and oh, by the way, we have a street sweeper that does a horrible job, and all he does is kick up the gravel because my road is falling apart. As the city manager, my job is to find solutions to fix the problems. We have an economy that is not going to grow and fix itself. Now, we're doing the things to help ourselves in the 2030s, but as we sit in the 2020s, we have to go to our community and ask those that derive the benefit to pay more for it. It's not popular. I understand that, but it's something that we at least have to put forward so that our community can have a choice in the community in which it lives. And so the first thing that we tackled in 2024 with Measure B is let's just keep our existing services up, right? It was the essential services measure, and that passed. Now we turn our attention to fixing our roads, which is Measure F. As we go to the next slide, this was kind of Measure A, which was just to kind of make sure that we maintained the services that we all enjoy. We still had to reduce it a little bit, but for the most part, we haven't seen fundamental change as residents. And that was because this community overwhelmingly supported the efforts of measures A and B. As we go to the next slide, we'll see what we're tackling today in November. We have measure F, which is our citizens initiative. It's a specific tax that can only be used to fund roads. Then there's measure G and H. They are related. Measure G is a charter city initiative for the sole purpose and limited purpose of allowing us, the voters, the right to vote on a real property transfer tax, which is the revenue source that, if passed, would generate about $850,000 each year. Now, that's a general purpose tax. So I cannot legally say, nor could the city council prior to the election saying, well, we're going to spend this much money on this and this much money on that. But what I can say is that we know that we need additional dollars for infrastructure. We know that we need additional dollars in the future to maintain our services. And we can do the math to figure out how that's going to work. Another important note with regard to our real property transfer tax. We know that we will see more development in the next 20 months than we have seen in the last 20 years. We're going to see housing development at the Yuba at Jefferson. We have an application for the Northern Gateway, which is the Sino property, for more than 1,000 homes. Now, there's a lot to discuss there, but still we know that we're going to see some development in Benicia that we haven't seen in a long time. When you have a new revenue stream, all of those new people coming into Benicia will buy in to fixing our infrastructure. That is the design. It's also designed that should we have any major commercial manufacturing folks leave Benicia, there would be a sizable revenue gain to the city to address our infrastructure. So that is the purpose of G and H. And as we turn right past on November 6th, we now look to our parks. So we go to the next slide. And so, well, actually, I'll take a moment and talk about F for a moment. What you're seeing here is this is what Benicia would look like in 2040 if we continue to spend $1 million on our roads. And 65% of all of our streets would degrade to a failing condition. That's a lot of red on that map. Contrast that by the next slide. If we are able to invest $5.5 million, I want to do quick math on this. How do we get to $5.5 million? Well, we know we get $1 million right now from state gas tax and from Republic Services. So that's $1 million. Well, measure F is going to generate $4 million. Okay, so that gets us to 5. So then we have to find another $500,000 with new revenue or cuts in order to get $5.5 million to spend on average each year over the next 15 years so that Benicia looks like this map. It is a plan that's put forward to our community that we have a choice to live in the community in which we choose. So as we go to the next slide, moving from roads to parks. In the infinite wisdom, when Benicia was being developed in the 70s and 80s, when Southampton went online, we put into place something called a landscape and lighting district. We have a little over 9,000 households in Benicia. About 4,800 of them are in the landscape and lighting districts, for which we have 5. When they put those in place, they did not put an escalator in, meaning that what you were paying in the 1970s and 1980s and 1990s is the exact dollar amount that you were paying today. We cannot maintain our park infrastructure from $1980. We are going to go to our community in 2025 and fix this. We are going to ask our community to create a single landscape and lighting district for the entire city of Benicia. And we're going to appropriately include annual escalators so we can keep up with inflation. And we're going to find a way to find capital or find dollars to address our capital needs. Now, it's important to note that the degree to what we ask for is going to be impacted by what happens in November. So if it passes, we have revenue to start beginning to address our infrastructure needs. If it doesn't, okay, that's fine. The community chooses, but we still have to address this at some point. So how are we going to do that? And there's going to be a cost, whether it's now or in the future. And I can assure you this, if we address something in the future, it's going to cost all of us more. Then in 2026, We finish up kind of our asks for local investment, and we address our business license, which hasn't been updated since 2003. Now, this is less to do about generating additional revenue, and we only generate about $600,000 from all of our businesses in Benicia, and has more to do with just bringing it up to a contemporary standard. And we're going to tackle that in November of 2026. So that's local investment. Now we go to our smart development. Well, actually, this got in here. You may have seen recent news articles and press releases. We received last week the Helen Putnam Award for excellence in internal administration. What does that mean? It means our engagement to the community. It means our transparency. It means our community's engagement with your city earned the most prestigious award local government can receive. And it was based on the work that you did as residents and your neighbors did in coming together. And I mean that sincerely. We had the Benicia Community Foundation light up our night sky paying for 4th of July and light up our Christmas tree on the first Friday in December. We had citizens from across this community come together in a resiliency task force to look at our budget and look at the process by which we will start to initiate priority-based budgeting in 2027. We had members of this community volunteer to be an independent citizen oversight committee, not to mention all of the people that have come to the library and the community center and various meetings to be engaged and informed about what's going on in Benicia. I can assure you, we are doing something special in this community. There were many elected officials and city managers last week in Long Beach at this conference that came up to myself, Mayor Young, Councilmember Birdseye, and said, "How did you do it?" Well, we did it because we communicated with our community. We were transparent with our community. And that led to engagement and a good result. And so we go to the next slide. Our final peer is smart growth. I noted a moment ago that the city council took action in 2022 and 23 and 24. Well, in 2022, we rezoned the Eastern Gateway. Well, what is that, Mario? Well, the Eastern Gateway is that commercial sector on Military East and East 5th Street. So think about where the Holiday Inn Express is and those kind of commercial buildings there. And your city staff got a grant from the state of California to do public outreach to that community and look at ways to rezone that to kind of redevelop that area. And so by a stroke of the pen, when Mayor Young signed the ordinance, we immediately increased the property value of that entire sector because we allowed for mixed use with commercial and residential. Now, it will take years for that to materialize because it's going to take a handful of property owners to probably wait for interest rates to go down, take a look, get the financing that's necessary, take down buildings and build something new. But it's something that will happen because we know we're going to get new residential developments at Jefferson. We know that Amports is going to work with a developer to build homes at the Yuba, which is the end of East 5th Street, adjacent our water treatment plant. So you have all those new residents that likely will come online in the next 5 to 10 years that are going to have to cross that intersection. There's going to be opportunity there for that redevelopment, but that doesn't happen overnight. We did something in 2022 that we probably won't even see any action on until maybe 2034. We have done things to encourage use out in the industrial park, but as I said, that industrial park is for the most part occupied. It's like 97% occupied, and there are very few parcels to build new buildings. So we have done things in 2024, excuse me, it was November of 23 to raise the height on downtown Benicia to encourage a hotel development. Now that could generate significant new sales tax and transient occupancy tax in the city. Again, something that we would kind of bear fruit in the 2030s. So as we look again and kind of finish up, it's important to note that I think we go to the next slide here. And this is our plug for our public outreach next Monday. And in light of being so close to Halloween, we've called this Wickedly Informed. It's a family-friendly event at our community center from 5:30 to 7:30. We'll have a taco truck out for people to purchase food. We will have extended activities for kids and Halloween activities, and kudos to our amazing recreation staff that are making that kid zone so that you can bring your family down. You can talk with me, you can meet our city council members, you can talk with members of our public works team. The whole idea is for you to be able to touch the people that are providing the services to you on a daily basis and ask your questions. And if you have questions on the city budget, you have questions on the ballot initiatives, you have questions on the work that was done on Rose Drive, that's the time to ask. And so that is the presentation. Again, for those that popped in, this is not my normal attire. I came in from coaching baseball, but it's an important point. I live here. I've lived most of my life here. I have 2 little kids that go to Joe Henderson Elementary School. It is my hope to be in this position as I see them graduate Benicia High School like I did. I'm in this with you, and I am committed to solving Benicia's problems. But it's going to take, as I have said, sacrifice, it's going to take discipline, and it's going to take patience. And if we can exercise all those things and do the work that's necessary in the last half of the 2020s, we will set ourselves up for great prosperity and growth in the 2030s. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. I see a few hands raised and up. So now it is your turn to talk and ask some questions or field some comments.
Go ahead, Bill. You are up first.
Okay, so are you confident that the half-cent sales tax is going to produce $4 million every year?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we have good data on, we had Measure C, which is our 1 cent sales tax. That was passed in 2014. And at the time, we really didn't know like where to estimate that. We actually were very conservative. In the early years of Measure C, we ended up having kind of more money than we had thought. And so we were able to do other projects. Now, here's what's important to note for the community, and why isn't that we wouldn't be exactly know how much money we're going to get from that particular sales tax. And I'm going to distinguish between the local use and transaction tax, for which if Measure F passes, we will have 3. And we had to get special legislation passed by the state of California in order to do this. And so I wanted to put a plug in for Assemblymember Wilson and her staff for doing a Herculean job in being able to allow all of us just the opportunity to vote on Measure F this November. So we're fairly confident. We know because Bradley Burns is the state sales tax. Every city in California gets 1% of all the sales that happen within that jurisdiction. A local use and transaction tax is a little bit different. So we get all of the transactions that occur in Benicia, but we also get something else. We get transactions that get delivered to Benicia or registered for Benicia. Well, what do I mean by that? That means that when you go to your front door and there's an Amazon package, we're going to get 1% of that. Well, actually, we're going to get 1.75 now that Measure B has been in place. And that's because it was, you purchased it. I mean, Amazon could be somewhere, it could be anywhere. You could have a distribution center in Tracy, it could be up in Vacaville, it doesn't matter. It matters that it was dropped off in Benicia, we're going to get that percentage of sales tax. If you buy a car at Toyota Vallejo or you buy a Tesla, which is actually a top sales tax producer in Benicia, we will get 1.75% of that sale. So it creates a little bit of volatility for us because we don't have those types of industry in Benicia. So it was hard in 2014 to really gauge. But now that we've had a decade of Measure C, we have a pretty good idea of how much money that's going to generate. And there's volatility. Sales tax can ebb and flow. But I think as a general rule, we feel pretty confident that we're going to be about $4 million on an annual basis for Measure F.
All right, Raquel, you are up with your question. Raquel, are you there? All right, let's move on to Chris. Chris, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, are you able to hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Chris.
This is Chris. Yeah, so Mario, I had a question about so the city of Richmond recently put together a ballot measure to tax oil refining at their Chevron refinery. And then in August, Chevron ended up proposing to the city council that they would pay them 500 million if they took that ballot measure off, and then the city council settled with them essentially on that for 500 million. But I wanted to see if would it be possible for us to do something similar in terms of a tax for oil refinery with our Valero refinery?
I appreciate that question, and I know that we've had members of our city council and our city attorney I mean, you're not the first to ask that question. I'm not familiar enough with the negotiations in Richmond and Chevron to really speak kind of intelligently as to the nuance on how they got that done. I can tell you that certainly we're obviously everyone in the area is interested in what they did and the details in that. And so it's something that we're looking at so that we can at least better answer that question. So that it'll be a little bit disappointing because I can say I don't know, candidly, but it's something that we're evaluating because it's a close neighbor that did that, and we want to figure out exactly how they went about doing that.
Okay.
Raquel, do you want to ask your question?
Okay, while we're waiting for a question, I want to kind of pose a question myself because I think it's really important to ask this question. Well, Mario, what happens if these local investment initiatives don't pass in November? It's a fair question. And again, I think it's really important to know that there's a distinction between the immediacy of what would have occurred in March had measures A and B, in particular B, not passed, versus the measures that are on the November ballot. For all intents and purposes, Measure F is a pass-through, right? It really is just used to kind of build our ability to bid out projects to fix our roads. So nothing immediate happens. We just won't be able to address our roads. And it's something that we will have to come to terms with. We're going to have to find those dollars somewhere, at least a portion of those dollars. Otherwise, it will be a cycle of doom because we'll never be able to kind of catch up, right? We have $60 million in deferred maintenance in our roads. In 10 years, that more than doubles to over 120 million. And it just becomes so large, we'll never be able to dig out of that hole. So it will be a major task for the staff and city council and community to figure that out. And candidly, we know what that looks like because we talked about what is a $5 million cut look like, because we talked about that in March, right? This was something that had Measure B not passed, we would have had to immediately work to massively change the service delivery in Benicia. We would have probably had to reduce more than 50 employees. And there's no way in the world you can't impact our quality of life services, whether it's recreation and library and parks and public safety, with that large of a staff reduction. And so what we would have to do is we're going to have to then speed up the evaluation on what services are we going to retire so that we can invest those dollars into our roads. So that's F. As it relates to G and H, again, there isn't an immediacy of the sky is falling, we're going to have to shut the pool down, the library, and lay off folks. But what it does foreshadow is a real pinch point when it comes to reducing services in a few years, right? We know we are going to reach a point in 28, 29 where we will not have the appropriate revenue to meet our service needs. Now, unlike what we did and had to face in March of this year, we're going to get ahead of it. So we're going to spend the next handful of years figuring out how to reduce services because it's binary. At the end of the day, we are a service industry and we spend our money providing services. And the money that we don't spend on services is spent on the equipment and contractors that fix our roads and irrigation and what have you. So that's the choice we're going to have to make should those not pass. And it's not, like I said, it's not immediate, but it's a foreshadow of things to come. Any other questions from folks? All right, I'm going to ask if this has come up, and so I will fill some time. I highlighted on an earlier slide a mailer that everyone received, and it was highlighting measures F, G, and H. And it was a fax mailer. And I know that some have commented about the city spending tax dollars to send out these mailers. It's important to know that the best way to inform our community is to have good communication. The only way to build trust is to make those of us in leadership in a city accessible and available to you all, and then give you all as residents the information you need to ask us questions. And so every single time you received one of these mailers, right? I have one on my desk right here, right? This one, 60 cents. It costs the city of Benicia 60 cents per resident. And so that's about $16,000 to send that out. I think you're worth 60 cents. That's in large part how we won an award from the state of California, League of California Cities, because it said, Benicia, you were committed to informing your community. You were committed to engaging your community. And in doing so, you're building transparency and trust. And so as the manager of the city, in a community that is aging, a community that is not always on social media, in a city that has an ever shrinking local paper in the Benicia Herald, literally it's smaller today than it was 6 months ago. We have to do our part to make that investment in you to make sure that you have the information. So I know that has come up recently and wanted to use this opportunity to address that. Any other questions? Okay. Well, we may have an earlier night. Well, listen, folks, I appreciate you coming on and spending your time with me. I have an ask, though, of you. And my ask is talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to your social network. Just make them aware of what's going on. It's not my job, and I cannot legally say, hey, vote one way or another for initiatives. It's not our job to advocate. It's our job to inform. And my only ask as a fellow resident is just make sure that your neighbor knows what's going on. Make sure that they understand where we are and what we're trying to do and address a structural deficit in Benicia and how we're trying to augment our economy in order to provide the services and the choice between that. That's my ask. That's kind of my request as kind of your civic duty to just tell a neighbor. You all have committed time. I appreciate that. A lot of us are busy. Just take an extra few moments and make sure that your neighbor or friends are aware of what we're doing in the city. And if they have questions, come see me. My feeling in all my Mondays with Mario, my Tuesday coffees, sitting on a steamroller, big a road warrior with our public works, it's all to make us available to you so that we're accessible. Bill, good. You got a question for us.
Is this recorded so we can tell other people about
It is recorded, and so our IT staff is recording this, and so we'll have a link, and we'll probably by tomorrow be able to kind of put that on our website. You can draw people's attention. They're going to wonder what the heck is a city meeting for the first 10 minutes. We're just chatting. We may cut that down a little bit, just jump right into the presentation. So we'll see if our IT staff can do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, folks, I'm going to hang on for a few more minutes just in case there's anyone that has a question that they are eager to ask. Otherwise, we will break early tonight, and so you will have your Tuesday evening. Okay, Raquel. Oh, good. Gotcha.
Go ahead, Raquel.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
I'm very sorry. It was actually a pocket raised hand. I was walking the dogs listening to the presentation, but I thought, why not? You have a few extra minutes. I sat in on city council member mayoral discussion at the high school, and I was just curious. I don't know anything about these two thoughts that were shared. regarding cost savings and then obtaining additional revenue. The one point that was brought up is that there's quite a bit of consulting fees for the city of Benicia. I don't know if that's the case. I'd love to know more. Is that something that can be looked at as cost cutting, less reliance on outside consulting, which sometimes comes at a premium? And the other thought that was brought up was regarding our airports and the port, and each vehicle at, I don't know if every other location that is similar to ours has a car fee for every vehicle that comes in. I mean, it looks like it's gangbusters out there. So was there an agreement, a handshake that happened decades ago where we can't even approach that? So those were the two things that I thought, well, if you have any information on that, would be very interesting.
Yeah, rockstar questions, Raquel. Those are good. So let's take the first one. I think it's really important to know that regardless of the outcome of the tax measures, we are going to be in a multi-year approach to reduce costs. And so I know it's kind of easy to point to the dollars that are not necessarily city employees, because that's what we all see as residents, right? We see our rec leaders when we go to the community center, our librarians, and we see our crews out in the parks and in the roads, and we're like, well, we don't want to see those people go, but it's the people that show up to city council meetings, and those are the consultants. Like, well, they can go, and I understand that. There's that's natural inclination, but let's talk about that for a little bit. It's important to know that when we utilize consultants, and a big portion of that budget is $1 million for our city attorney services, which is required by law. So, when we think about outside consultants, it's also important to note that, well, we have a variety of, legal issues for which we need that expertise. You're not going to cut your city attorney. We have a variety of expertise that's needed for our housing elements that's required and mandated by the state of California. So when you start chipping away and pulling back the areas in which we are using financial consultants, we have to have an auditor. That is a financial consultant, right? That's required by law. And so we can't cut the auditor. So when you start peeling back and seeing, well, where are we actually investing in these outside consultants? Much of it is mandated by a variety of state law and just the operation of governmental affairs. Additionally, it's important to know that oftentimes when we utilize consultants, in some ways, while there is a premium, it's still less expensive than having a full-time staff person, because with that, you have to pay up all the roll-up costs with retirement and health and workers' comp and what have you, versus a consultant who's there for a limited purpose for a limited time. And so certainly we will review that, and it's going to be an ongoing process. As a manager, I can tell you that there's not millions of dollars that we are able to kind of recoup from not using services that we can put in for the roads. What I can't say is there's millions of dollars of services that we can stop doing, and that's absolutely okay. And it's important we realize that, like, there's a choice. Like, we have, for a better part of this century, prioritized services to infrastructure. And if the community says, listen, it is too expensive to live here in Benicia, and we just can't pay anymore, that is understandable completely. There's just a trade-off, because now we have to retire back our services so that we can invest in infrastructure, because we can't live in a community that just continues to deteriorate and falls apart, right? That's just going to cost us more on a variety of fronts. Question 2, airports. There's a reason why I am so bullish and optimistic when we look to the horizon and we get to the 2030s, because we're going to see a lot of things kind of go our way. Airports is a 66-year lease that the city negotiated with, at the time, Benicia Industries. And we receive $0 from like a rental or lease income, nor we receive any dollars from all the cars that are moved off the water into the port. But here's some important facts to know about that. The vast majority of land where you see cars parked is owned by Amports. The city doesn't own any land. We have a small sliver for which we are trustees. Where our value lies is we are trustees on the water parcels for which the dock sits. Now, that is rather unique, Raquel, to other ports that have a different dynamic. And so we are kind of alone when you're comparing apples to oranges. We're a banana. And we're in the process of figuring out how best to evaluate what that kind of revenue should be when that lease is negotiated in 2030 and 2031 and 2032. And that is work that is ongoing. And I know some people have said, well, why don't you just do a lease now? Well, I would return us to history. We got a 66-year lease where we received $0 because at the time, Benicia didn't have two nickels to rub together, right? The Army was leaving. We were in a really bad way in the 1960s. And so the agreement that we kind of bemoan today created the land swap that facilitated the Benicia Industrial Park, that landed Humble Oil, that created the Benicia that we have today. So it's important to know that while it might be a little bit of kind of recency bias that, well, we're not getting any income from that lease, it created the engine of economy that led Benicia for the last 60 years. So I think that's important to realize. But as we move forward, we're going to have to do things a little bit differently. And I certainly don't want to renegotiate a lease for which there's a valuable city asset when we are not in good financial standing, because we will be doing exactly what we did in the 1960s. So Benicia has to get our own financial house in order and do the necessary work. Speaking of consultants, WSP is a consultant that we have that does this internationally to evaluate ports. There's no one on city staff that can do that, but they're going to provide a valuable resource to us when we meet with Amports and sit down and figure out how to facilitate a new lease. And as I've said before, our future is in our water. We have an opportunity to think more about what's going on in the port. We're working now on a green empowerment zone, and Benicia Port is being considered for offshore wind manufacturing. In fact, Mayor Young and Councilmember Birdseye went on a boat trip at the Long Beach when we were at California, League of California Cities, to see the work of major wind turbine installations that will be located in Southern California and Northern California. And they have to build those things somewhere, and they need protected ports. Well, guess what? There's not a lot of deep water ports. We have one of them. So there's opportunity for Benicia into the future. And that's what makes me so excited about the 2030s. That's just one of the reasons. So hopefully that answered your questions, Raquel. Okay, anyone else? Here's another question while we're waiting. It hasn't come up, but often does. And that's the cost of city employees, in particular, retirement costs. And the cost for city employees is very expensive. It's far more expensive today than it was in the 1990s, which is part of the problem that we have, right? We're kind of operating on this 1990s model, and yet the cost of a city employee has exponentially grown. And that is just the result of the market and labor market in California. Notwithstanding that, Benicia is still well below market from our competitive agencies on where people can get jobs in local government. And so we are still in many cases 15%, in some cases 20% below market when employees are looking for other places to go work. Second, our public employee retirement system, which is very expensive and not sustainable. When Governor Brown, in his second tour of duty in 2012, he put forward significant reforms to public employee retirement. Those reforms will bear fruit in 2031 for Benicia. What do I mean by that? On an annual basis, we're spending about a little more than $8 million right now on our PERS liability. That's what we pay basically every year. And that will grow to about $14 million in 2031. That is a significant portion of our budget. But then it plateaus and then it starts going down. And so again, once we get to the mid-30s, we see this downward slope where before every year, more and more of our budget had to pay for those retirement costs. When we get to the 30s, less and less of our budget will have to go to retirement costs, and that can be reinvested into providing current services, current infrastructure needs. So we just have to get there to do that. There's very little we can do as a city to kind of mitigate those costs, save for one thing: have fewer people. And so many people will say, well, can't you just reduce salaries? You can't do that because we're not competitive as it is. It wasn't that long ago that it took 13 months to get a single qualified application for our police department because we were so below market and we were losing applicants one right after the other. They would go through our interview process and then get picked up by another agency. So the only lever we really have is to reduce our headcount. And so that's why it's part of that strategy moving forward into the 2030s. Any other questions? Okay, folks, as I promised about 10 minutes ago, we'll cut this thing early so everyone can enjoy their night, have dinner. I thank everybody. I appreciate it. You're part of the award that we received. And I thank you for that. So have a wonderful night. We will post this probably tomorrow. Thank you for participating. Have a wonderful night. Stay safe. Have a great Halloween. And be sure to vote in November. We're 2 weeks out, everybody. Take care. Thank you.